We live in interesting times.
For the headlines.
Essentially what we have seen in this report.
The world will miss its chance to avert climate disaster without an immediate and all but impossible fall in fuel emissions, the UN says in its annual assessment of greenhouse gases.
Now,
Albanian rescuers dig through rubble in search of survivors after the strongest earthquake in decades levels buildings and traps victims under debris, claiming 13 lives and injuring more than 100 people.
Absolutely no immunity. A Washington appeals court judge rules that President Donald Trump's top aides must comply with subpoenas issued by the impeachment investigation.
And Hong Kong's unpopular leader Carrie Lam acknowledges that public dissatisfaction with her government fueled a landslide win by pro-democracy candidates in local elections, but she drew fresh criticism by offering no new concessions to resolve months of violent protests.
Well, Mga Angeles, wherever you're watching from around the world, thank you very much for joining us.
We welcome our viewers here in the Philippines and around the world. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sam Cepeda.
And now to the news. The world will miss its chance to avert climate disaster without an immediate and all but impossible fall in fossil fuel emissions, the UN said Tuesday in its annual assessment on greenhouse gases. The United Nations Environment Program said that global emissions need to fall by 7.6% each year, every year until 2030 to limit global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The Paris deal committed nations to limit temperature rises above pre-industrial levels to well below 2 degrees Celsius and to a safer 1.5 degrees Celsius if at all possible. Yet the UN found that even taking into account current Paris pledges, the world is on track for a 3.2 degrees Celsius temperature rise, something scientists fear could tear at the fabric of society. Let's listen in.
Essentially what we have seen in this report and what you are seeing, that at this time, had we acted in 2010, we would have had to reduce our emissions by 3.2% a year, or by 3.3% a year. Now, because of climate procrastination, which we have essentially had during these 10 years, we are looking at a 7.6% reduction every year. Is that possible? Absolutely. Will it take political will? Yes. Will we need to have the private sector lean in? Yes. But the science tells us that we can do this. And the opportunities are there, but failure is simply not an option. If we don't do this, we already saw in the IPBES report that came out earlier in this year that out of the 7.8 million species that we have on this planet, 1 million is threatened by extinction, in part also due to climate change. We understand that at 1.5 degrees, 70% of the coral reefs will die. At 2 degrees, practically all coral reefs disappear. We understand that insects that we need for pollination to have our food production will be significantly impacted, and we are likely to lose massive habitats and therefore insects at the higher level. And all of that, of course, impacts on livability and on poverty reduction. So at this point, the opportunities to decarbonize is very real. Decarbonizing our energy supply. We call for green industrialization target and net zero energy buildings and construction, as well as, obviously, as we so do, also invest in nature and nature's opportunity to provide us with that buffer, the nature-based solutions during the time when we are decarbonizing. This 10 years, which has to be a massive effort on decarbonization by ensuring restoration of degraded ecosystems systems as well as protecting standing forests, we can get a break from nature that will help us, give us a leg up while we are taking carbon out of our energy supply. Nature will help us taking it up into its biomass kind. The bottom line here is that this is doable. It is a massive lift. Had we done it 10 years ago, it would have been easier, but we still have the time.
Because most of the impacts of climate change are not related only to temperature. The main impact so far and also by the end of this century is coming from the changes in rainfall patterns, and we have started seeing already some of the regions to become more dry, especially Africa and southern parts of Asia and some parts of Americas. With the 3 degrees we would lose already a fairly big fraction of the current yield, and areas like Africa where the population is growing would really suffer because of that, and that's to me the main concern related to climate change. Sea level rise happens fairly slowly. It's the magnitude is about half meter to 1 meter per century, and so, but that's one factor which will happen in the long term, but in the short term these changes in rainfall patterns is to me the main matter of concern.
Terms is not, I referred to insects and coral reefs, but let's also think about likelihood of greater intensity of storms, shorter rainy seasons, therefore not in accord with the time needed for harvest, for harvest to ripen, especially in some of the most drought-stressed or severity on desertification stressed regions. So the impact there, and therefore that impact on people who are already living living in marginal settings, is clearly one to be mindful of.
World Meteorological Organization said that levels of the 3 main heat-trapping gases emitted into the atmosphere, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, have reached yet another high. In an appeal to governments to do more to reverse countries' reliance on producing energy from fossil fuels in line with the 2015 Paris Agreement on Climate Change, Petteri Taalas, Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, or WMO, warned that the future welfare of mankind was at stake.
We have again broken records in carbon dioxide concentrations, and we have already exceeded 400 ppm level, which was regarded as a critical level. That happened already 2 years ago, and this growth of carbon dioxide concentration continues, and last year's increase was about the same as we have been observing during the past 10 years as an average. In the case of methane, we have also been breaking records, and the increase last year was the second highest during the past 10 years. Nitrous oxide, it has contributed about 6% of the warming so far, and it's very much coming from farmlands, and again there we have been breaking records. The steady growth of N2O concentration still continues. At the moment we produce 85% of the global energy based on fossil ones, coal, oil and gas, which are shown here, and only 15% based on nuclear, hydro and renewables. And to be successful in implementation of the Paris Agreement, we should revert those numbers in the coming decades. Classically, it used to be Europe and North America, USA, but China has become #1 emitter, but there has been also fairly strong growth in the emissions of non-OECD countries. And this is demonstrating that if we want to solve this problem, we have to have global efforts. European Union nor USA cannot solve it alone, nor China. We have to have all of the countries on board. Governments nowadays understand that this is a challenge, and what is good news is that the visibility of these issues is highest ever, and the good news is also that the private sector is more and more interested in finding solutions.
In the northwest of the country, a three-story hotel in the port town of Duras collapsed, while another building in the city center was badly damaged. Damage was also reported in Thumana, 30 kilometers northwest of Tirana. The quake was felt across the Balkans from Sarajevo to Bosnia and even in the Serbian city of Novi Sad, almost 700 kilometers away, according to reports in local media and on social networks. The European Mediterranean Seismological Center said it was followed by several aftershocks, including one of magnitude 5.3. The same region of Albania was hit by a 5.6 magnitude quake in September, described by authorities as the strongest earthquake of the last 20 to 30 years.
Particularly harmful in a global warming context because it remains in the atmosphere for centuries and the oceans for even longer. And here's more.
Last 100. Global warming was exclusively a naturally occurring process. The Earth's atmosphere is made up of gases, some of which absorb infrared radiation. This means they retain heat from the sun, forming a thermal layer around the planet. Without this so-called greenhouse effect, temperatures would be around -18 degrees Celsius, so there would be no or little life on Earth. But the warming process has been destabilized as levels of key greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide, have reached their highest in 800,000 years. In the last 130 years, the global average surface temperature has risen by 0.85 degrees Celsius. The current trend could lead to a 4-degree rise after another 80 years. Scientists agree that humans are influencing the climate system. Through fossil fuel burning, around 2,000 billion tons of carbon dioxide have been emitted since the start of the Industrial Revolution in 1750. Intensive agriculture. Methane produced by the sector accounts for 10 to 12% of global greenhouse gas emissions, 40% of which come from livestock alone. And deforestation, which destroys carbon dioxide absorbing vegetation. Recent climate changes are already impacting humans and natural systems worldwide, with an increase in phenomena like worsening drought, flooding, rising seas as glaciers melt and seawater expands, ocean acidification and the extinction of species. United Nations climate experts warn of devastating and irreversible consequences if global warming is not quickly and sharply limited.
President Duterte lauded the bond between the people of the Philippines and the Republic of Korea, or ROK, that has never been strong in no other time of both countries' shared history. President Duterte did not miss also the opportunity to thank the South Korean government for its $100,000 donation for the victims of a series of earthquakes that rocked Mindanao in October. He also added that in 2018, South Korea was Philippines' fourth largest trading partner. Let's listen in.
After we had designated 2019 as the year of mutual exchanges during your visit last year, many cultural exchange events were held in Korea, including concerts, film festivals and exhibitions. These events have brought the Korean people closer to the Philippines. The Philippines was the first among ASEAN countries to establish diplomatic relations with Korea and also the first to dispatch troops to fight on our side during the Korean War. I'd like to express my profound gratitude to the people of the Philippines for their lasting friendship over the past 70 years and to you, Mr. President, for your great affection for Korea.
This year is auspicious. We mark the 30th anniversary of the ASEAN Republic of Korea dialogue relations, and we commemorate 70 years of meaningful bilateral relations. In the meantime, our economies took a diverging paths and fortunes. The Republic of Korea rose to become one of Asia's economic and technological powerhouse. Ours faltered, but with perseverance, the Philippines has since recovered and is now well-performing emerging economy. The past 7 years, decades have witnessed the level of our interaction rise. Our cooperation encompasses various spheres, from trade, investment, and order to infrastructure development, defense, science, technology, and agriculture. I thank your government for donating $100,000 for the earthquake victims in Mindanao last month. Clearly, at no other time in our shared history have the bonds been of our peoples this strong. In 2018, the Republic of Korea was our fourth largest trading partner, with total trade amounting to over $13 billion.
The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN's 10 member countries, and South Korea on Tuesday agreed to resist all forms of protectionism and enhance trade for regional prosperity. South Korean President Moon Jae-in urged everyone to build a fair, free trade community to prevent the spread of trade protectionism from shrinking trade and investment in the region. The agreement was reached after the two-day ASEAN Rock Commemorative Summit was held in Busan, the southern port city of South Korea, to celebrate the 30th anniversary of dialogue partnership between the two sides. The special summit was co-chaired by Moon and Thai Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. In the co-chair's statement, they welcomed the conclusion of tax-based negotiations on Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. Initiated in 2012, the RCEP brought together 10 member countries of the ASEAN and their 6 trade partners in the region, including China, South Korea, Japan, India, Australia, and New Zealand.
To other news now, Hong Kong's deeply unpopular leader Carrie Lam acknowledged that public dissatisfaction with her government fueled a landslide win by pro-democracy candidates in local elections. However, she offered no new concessions to resolve months of violent protests. Let's listen in.
That we were aware of the large number of voters coming out to cast a vote, perhaps not only to select a preferred candidate to sit on the district council, but also to express a view on many issues in society, including, I would readily accept that, including deficiencies in governance, including unhappiness with the time taken to deal with the current unstable environment, and of course to end violence.
In a rout that stunned the semi-autonomous territory, candidates seeking to loosen control by China seized an overwhelming majority of the 452 elected seats in the city's 18 district councils, bodies that have historically been firmly in the grip of a Beijing-aligned establishment. The poll outcome has re-energized calls by the pro-democracy camp for direct popular elections for the city's leadership and legislature, and a probe into alleged police brutality against demonstrators. But Mrs. Lam sidestepped those calls, instead reiterating an earlier pledge to open a dialogue among all parties in the territory, a proposal that opponents have dismissed as too little too late.
So I said that we will seriously reflect on these views expressed to us and improve governance in the future of our work. We have officially and formally withdrawn the bill, which was a cause of all these social unrest. The next step to go forward is really, as you have put it, to engage the people. And we have started public dialogue with the community. But unfortunately, with the unstable environment and the chaotic situation, I could not do more of that sort of engagement. I hope that the environment will allow me to do it now.
I hope that they all realize that with the level of voting that I'm sure is happening today, that everyone is invested. All the people of Hong Kong want change. They need the violence to stop. They need things to improve for everyone. Our everyday life has to go on in a much better way than it is at the moment.
Some would believe that we have won the election, the people have won, but I don't think this is what we really wanted ultimately. What we wanted is the good laws to be enforced, and the law enforcers should be really doing the job rather than just standing on the opposite side of the people. I think this is a very good example to demonstrate how democracy is important to the people, because the high rate of voting yesterday have shown a very encouraging message to everybody else and to the world.
Validation at the ballot box is expected to give fresh impetus to the protest movement and encourage reform advocates to step up their demands. Before counting was even completed on Monday, leading figures in the Democratic camp called on Mrs. Lam and her government to immediately grant the demands. Some have called for the entire city executive to step down. Various public activities also are planned this week to keep the pressure on, and chatter on pro-democracy forums online has called for a major rally on Sunday.
I think Chinese leaders have to realize that almost the entire population of Hong Kong understand that independence is not a realistic option. Hong Kong people do not want to challenge Chinese authorities' sovereignty over Hong Kong nor state security. They want to be left alone at the very minimum, and they want their dignity, their basic human rights, their freedom, their rule of law be respected and upheld. But there is obviously an attempt on the part of the Chinese leadership to present Hong Kong people's demands as advocacy of independence, and therefore it deserves a crackdown. The community's dissatisfaction and anger will continue to grow, leading to the maintenance of a long-term non-cooperation campaign. Now, this is going to be a very sad scenario for Hong Kong. It means that a lot of people in Hong Kong do not see the light at the end of the tunnel, and they do not see serious prospects of a return to normalcy. Monday morning, Carrie Lam indicated only that she will listen to the voice of the people. She will carefully study their demands, which are certainly empty words in the eyes of Hong Kong people.
China has summoned the U.S. ambassador to demand that the United States scrap legislation backing Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement or bear all the consequences, the foreign ministry said Tuesday. The Hong Kong bill awaiting President Donald Trump's signature supports human rights and democracy in the city while threatening to revoke the territory's special economic status. Excuse me. A separate measure bans the sale of tear gas, rubber bullets, and other equipment used by the security forces to suppress pro-democracy protests. Vice Foreign Minister Zheng Zhiguang summoned U.S. Ambassador Terry Branstad on Monday to voice a strong protest over the bill, the ministry said in a statement. As the legislation brazenly interferes in China's internal affairs and indulges and supports the violent criminal behavior by anti-China disrupting Hong Kong's forces, the ministry said. Trump has not indicated whether he will sign the legislation into law, saying last week that while he stood with Hong Kong, he also stood with his friend President Xi Jinping.
In other news, the chief of the U.S. Navy on Sunday criticized President Trump after being sacked in a dispute over an elite SEAL commando whose demotion for misconduct was reversed by the president. Take a look. This is Richard Spencer. He was ousted as Navy Secretary, a civilian position in a case that has fueled reports that the U.S. military leadership has been angered by President Trump's interference in discipline cases. I no longer share the same understanding with the Commander-in-Chief who appointed me in regards to the key principles of good order and discipline, Spencer said in a stinging letter published by U.S. media. I hereby acknowledge my termination as United States Secretary of the Navy. The U.S. Defense Secretary Mark Esper defended the decision to sack his Navy Secretary, saying he went behind his back to make a deal with the White House over a convicted Navy SEAL's future. Mark Esper told reporters Richard Spencer, the Navy's top civilian, admitted he had gone around Esper and Joint Chiefs Chairman Mark Milley. Esper and Milley were holding their own discussions with President Trump last week about the SEALs case, which caused a rare public split between the Pentagon leadership and the U.S. Commander-in-Chief over military justice. We were completely caught off guard by this information and realized that it undermined everything we have been discussing with the President, Esper said of Spencer's secret talks. He said there is a chain of command that should be followed and that Secretary Spencer broke these rules and thus lost trust and confidence. Now, the dispute centers on the fate of Navy SEAL Edward Gallagher, who was accused of war crimes in a high-profile case but was found guilty of a lesser offense. In July, the 40-year-old Gallagher was acquitted of charges related to the stabbing death of a wounded Islamic State prisoner in Iraq in 2017. He was convicted of a lesser charge, posing with a slain fighter's body in a group picture with other SEALs, and then demoted one rank from Chief Petty Officer to Petty Officer First Class. Gallagher's prominent charge was that he killed a captive teenage Islamic State fighter with a handmade custom blade. Now, under Geneva Convention protections governing war prisoners, the captive should have been protected from harm by the military as he was no longer a lawful target. On November 15, President Trump, the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. military, reversed the demotion handed down to Gallagher.
With Eddie Gallagher, you know that story very well. They wanted to take his pin away, and I said, no, you're not going to take it away. He was a great fighter. He was one of the ultimate fighters. Tough guy. These are not weak people. These are tough people. And we're going to protect our war fighters. And I've been given a lot of thank yous. No, I think what I'm doing is sticking up for our armed forces. And there's never been a president that's going to stick up for them and has, like I have, including the fact that we spent $2.5 trillion on rebuilding our armed forces.
Donald Trump's top aides must comply with subpoenas to appear in the impeachment investigation against the president, a U.S. appeals court judge ruled. In a case involving former White House counsel Don McGahn, who was subpoenaed in May by the House Judiciary Committee, Judge Ketanji Jackson ruled Monday that administration officials cannot claim absolute immunity from testifying based on their closeness to the U.S. leader. While Jackson ruled specifically on McGahn's case, she said it had broad application to all current and former presidential aides. Presidents are not kings, Jackson wrote in her decision. No one, not even the head of the executive branch, is above the law. She said Congress has the power to subpoena any of the president's advisors, whether they are involved in domestic policies or sensitive national security issues. That ruling could open a path for the House Intelligence Committee, which is building a case for impeachment charges against Trump, to force testimony from 3 top witnesses: former National Security Advisor John Bolton, White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. All are believed to have direct knowledge of Trump's alleged demand that Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky open investigations into Trump's Democratic rival Joe Biden in exchange for a high-profile summit and much-needed military aid.
In other news, 13 French soldiers were killed in Mali when two helicopters collided while fighting insurgents in the country's restive north, according to officials on Tuesday, the heaviest single loss for the French military in nearly 4 decades. The accident occurred late Monday while the helicopters were reinforcing ground troops pursuing the insurgents in the Leptako region near the borders of Burkina Faso and Niger, according to the Armed Forces Ministry. Mali has been besieged by a wave of deadly strikes against army outposts and other targets in recent weeks, a flare-up of violence despite years of efforts to push back the Islamist extremists. A Tiger attack helicopter collided with a Cougar military transport helicopter while engaging the insurgents fleeing on motorbikes and in pickup trucks. Now both aircraft crashed not far from each other, killing all on board.
With the ongoing measles outbreak in the South Pacific nation of Samoa, which by far claimed as many as 25 lives, it should not be surprising that the U.S. territory of American Samoa is monitoring the situation and taking necessary precautions. Our EBC correspondent Arian Torres-Juan has some updates.
It's very sad that we've heard about the deaths of children, young children in Samoa. I think there's about between 22 to 25 children already. That's pretty high, and so we're hoping that this thing will pass. And
even before mainstream media and other countries acknowledge the measles epidemic in independent Samoa, authorities in American Samoa were already taking notice.
Back in October, the government's health department published an update in identifying the number of vaccinations administered on the student throughout the territory. At that time, only 7 cases of measles were confirmed in neighboring Samoa. Since then, various government agencies have responded to the crisis by encouraging the public to be proactive in preventing contamination, as seen on these posters at a local health clinic. As far as air travel, officials at Pango Airport were not available for an interview. However, they invited Eagle News to attend a press conference later this week to update the media on the measles outbreak. To recall, the average flight between American Samoa in the east and independent Samoa in the west is only 39 minutes. Because almost all the casualties in Samoa have been children, school officials here have shared their concerns on this growing problem.
I'm glad that the independent state of Samoa Ministry of Health was able to implement a way of vaccinating children who have not been vaccinated, and also that their government has taken steps to prevent people from catching the disease or even spreading the disease, and so they've limited the entry of visitors from other islands, and also they wanted to make sure that when people come in or leave the island that they've been properly immunized. As far as the risk of people here in American Samoa in contracting the disease, I'm just hoping that our Department of Health has made sure that all the children, especially those that are in the schools, have already received their vaccinations, that they've had their immunizations up to date.
I was really saddened when I read the paper this morning saying that there were several deaths and I just don't know how to react to it. It's just a sad, tragic event that has happened, and I just hope that it doesn't happen to us here in American Samoa, because it reminds me of what happened back in early 1900s when we had the Spanish flu, and those who were afflicted with the flu at that time were not allowed to land in American Samoa. And with all that our government is doing for us right now, hopefully we can just contain it and not have it spread here in American Samoa.
Meanwhile, on the international stage, UNICEF has already provided assistance to Samoa and nearby countries affected by the disease. The U.S. government, however, has yet to acknowledge the said crisis on their own websites.
Reporting from Pango in American Samoa, I am Arian Torres Suwan, 1 with 25. Pakapitay, Telelaba. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Arian, for that update. Eagle News will be back with more right after this break. Stay tuned. Chinese online retail giant Alibaba surged as it drew back the curtain on a Hong Kong listing the firm described as a vote of confidence in the embattled city.
3, 2, 1, hit!
The long-delayed trading day got off to a glitzy start with Chief Executive Officer Daniel Zhang joined on stage at a stock exchange ceremony by dignitaries including City Financial Secretary Paul Chan and former Hong Kong Chief Executive Tung Chee-hwa. Soon after the gong was sounded, Asia's most valuable company surged to almost 8%, a bright start after a blockbuster initial public offering or IPO that has raised at least $11 billion, making it the city's biggest in nearly a decade.
我想今年是阿里巴巴的第20周年，在这个20周年生日之际，我们迎来了一个重要的里程碑，就是回香港上市。
I'm also grateful that they choose to come despite the difficulties, despite the challenges that we are going through here in Hong Kong. I'm also grateful. 谁也救不了市，这个市不是救的，这个市是市场，市场大家要往下走，救也没用，也不需要救。
The listing comes as a major boost to Hong Kong, which has been racked by months of sometimes violent protests and the China-US trade war, sending the economy into recession. Alibaba listed at 176 Hong Kong dollars, below a 188 Hong Kong dollar indicative ceiling originally announced, but briefly hit a high of 189.50 Hong Kong dollars in mid-morning business. With 500 million shares offered to investors, the company raised 88 billion Hong Kong dollars in the IPO, the highest since AIA garnered $20.5 billion in 2010. If it chooses to use an over-allotment option to sell a further 75 million shares, it could bring in 101.2 billion Hong Kong dollars.
The threat of tariffs continues to loom large at a time when companies are facing higher costs of production, lower sales and profit margins, and retaliatory actions by other countries. SAMA, or Specialty Equipment Market Association, is part of the Driving American Jobs Coalition, which is comprised of the leading automakers, parts suppliers, auto dealers, parts distributors, retailers, and vehicle service providers, and stands united in opposition to auto tariffs that would have damaging effects on consumers and the nation's economy. The negotiations with China are especially challenging. SAMA vendors attendees weigh in on auto part import tariffs. Our ABC correspondent Anna Kui reports from Las Vegas.
Welcome to SEMA 2019, held annually here in Las Vegas. It is definitely the place where you can see the hottest and newest products in the automotive aftermarket. And even if you're not into cars, you don't want to miss this.
The Specialty Equipment Market Association organizes the SEMA show, and it represents the $44.6 billion automotive aftermarket industry. This 4-day event consistently attracts more than 161,000 people, connecting manufacturers to industry buyers from all over the world. Whether one is looking for parts that will enhance their vehicle performance and style, the choices seem endless from the 2,400 exhibiting companies. We caught up with some attendees and asked them what brought them to SEMA this year.
Favorite parts about SEMA? Yeah. Just seeing all the builds, all the stuff you don't see every day. And my dad's got a 72 Ford Mustang that we're trying to work on. We're trying to get that back on the road too. So yeah, that's probably the dream car right now, is getting that Mustang on the road.
We make the old-time steering wheels just like the originals, but we make them 15-inch instead of 18-inch. The 56, 57 T-Bird or Ford. Here's another 5860 T-Bird. There's a 57 Chevy.
Here we are at SEMA, and I'm debuting my latest piece. It's a 1959 VW bus that I've had my way with.
The most anticipated part of this trade show is the SEMA Ignited. It takes place right after the SEMA show closes as cars and trucks parade out of the Las Vegas Convention Center. Ignited is the official SEMA show after party that is open to the general public. Attendees got to see drift demonstrations by professional drivers, including Mike Ryan, a Hollywood stunt driver with a long list of credentials, including his work in the Fast and Furious franchise. The celebration continued with exciting entertainment, including the culmination of the SEMA Battle of the Builders competition.
With all the talent, I'm not saying our car's the best. I just think that it was nice that it was different enough for somebody to pick it.
But SEMA is not just about the show or their love for cars, trucks, and SUVs. They also have a government affairs team dedicated to advocating on behalf of the industry. One concern that is high on their list is President Trump's plan to impose tariffs on auto part imports.
The president had commissioned a report from the Department of Commerce to look at the possibility of Section 232 tariffs, which are on a national security basis on autos and auto parts. That would be 25% tariffs, and that he delayed that decision 6 months, which I believe is ending around November 13th. So we are very much opposed to these tariffs. So we support the general idea that the administration is trying to level the playing field with other countries when it comes to tariffs, and we believe in fair trade, but we think that tariffs should be the last resort in this kind of negotiation.
We also caught up with a few attendees, both buyers and manufacturers, and here's what they shared with us.
We're made in America, so we love it. Yeah, bump it up to 35. It helps our business, helps all the companies like ours. We doubled our size, so I have no problem with it at all.
I don't have any opinion per se. I know that we don't import from China, so that's really not had an effect on us. Some of the material tariffs on aluminum have had an asymmetric effect on us and increase in price, and that hurts the manufacturer. But I would say overall it's pretty negligible right now because we don't import.
Here's what they said on the possible effects it would have on the industry and the consumers.
I think that the imposition of 232 tariffs on auto and auto parts, 25%, will be a straw that breaks the camel's back for a lot of our companies. I think you're going to see huge disruption in the amount of the productivity, the profits, the employment. I think it would be a weight on the general economy and a huge weight on the auto sector.
Any increase like that will affect the consumer. It will be passed on directly through them. Most people respond by just passing the prices through.
Our export, especially to China, it's up in the 20-30% range. So it's only equalizing it. So once both sides decide to come down the same amount, then it's great for both sides. It's equal trade. That's the way it should be.
According to a report from the U.S. Department of Commerce Foreign Trade Division, the U.S. imported about $157 billion in auto parts last year. Reporting from SEMA 2019 in Las Vegas, for Eagle News, I'm Anna Kui and I'm 1 with 25.
The Philippines and South Korea signed an early achievement package ahead of the conclusion of the free trade agreement by the first half of 2020. The Philippines and South Korea signed 5 agreements, namely on cooperation in social security, tourism, culture and sports, as well as the much-anticipated free trade between the two countries. Following the bilateral meeting between President Rodrigo Duterte and South Korean President Moon Jae-in, during a courtesy call of South Korea's major companies on President Duterte Monday at the Paradise Hotel in South Korea, the chief executive vowed to shield them from corruption and abuse, particularly on ease of doing business, quick issuance of permits, and full guarantee on the return of their investments and remittances. The Korean companies, in return, made commitments to invest in the Philippines, with some already operating in the country and some are expanding. They promised to participate in different infrastructure projects, especially the administration's Build, Build, Build program.
The World Trade Center is one of the venues for the upcoming 30th Southeast Asian Games. Karate, fencing, and wushu seats and bleachers still not completed for viewers of the games. There are no mats yet for sports equipment, but authorities say they're working double time for the start of the event. House Speaker Alan Peter Cayetano, head of FIS GOC, said all these are the result of the delay in budget. He also said contracts were also awarded late due to the delay in the 2019 budget. Mr. Cayetano pointed to Senator Franklin Drilon's cut for the budget of the Philippine Sports Commission. The leader of the Senate defended all these in view of some of the reported failures for the SEA Games. Senator Manny Pacquiao, meanwhile, said to stop the blame game and we should focus on preparation for the event. Some SEA Games teams have earlier aired frustrations in social media over issues on accommodations and upon arriving at the airport in Manila.
Medyo nasaktan lang sila no sa pintas siguro ni Senator Drilon tungkol doon sa Caldron, no? Siguro ganun lang yun, kaya parang binabalikan nila si Senator Drilon. Pero in fairness, it was the idea of Senator Drilon, kaya natapos yung tinatawag na impasse nung budget, ng 2019 budget. Sapagkat isinuggest niya sa akin na lagyan ko na lang ng annotation. Sabi niya, pirmahan ko na, lagyan ko ng annotation, at ilahat ko sa Presidente kung ano nyo sa tingin namin ay naging unconstitutional doon sa
yung strong reservation.
The best way sa ngayon kasi dapat nagkakaisa tayo, nagtutulungan tayo. Huwag muna natin pag-usapan yung mga problema para makapagbigay tayo ng support sa ating mga atleta at ma-encourage yun, yung moral support natin para sa ating mga atleta para manalo sila.
Hindi naman po siguro yun ang dahilan. Kaya naman kung talaga kulang talaga sa preparasyon. Alam nyo, minsan sila last minute humahabol. Sabi 85%, 90%. Hindi po sapat yung apology sa ngayon. Mag-ano na lang, trabaho na lang muna kayo, magtulungan na lang. Ayusin nyo muna yung 5 days to go. Huwag nating hayaan mapahiya. As host tayo dito, nakataya yung pangalan ng ating bansa. Pero hindi lang naman po nagkaroon ng aberya ngayong taon na to. Iba lang po ngayon, madaling kumalat. Noong unang panahon, sabi ni Senator Joel, yung national team siya, 6 na oras daw silang pinag-antay. So, may mga aberya naman po noong unang panahon. Hindi lang po nababalita. Sa akin ngayon, let's get back to work. Let's buckle down to work. Tulungan po natin ang ating, nakataya rito yung atleta rin natin. To uplift their moral, dapat suportahan natin sila.
With its bubblegum pink balloons, neon-colored ball pits, and a retro American diner as ready-made photogenic backdrops, the Super Candy Museum is an Instagrammer's dream. In this pop-up selfie museum, visitors say having fun outweighs the hunt for likes in a changing social media landscape. Watch this.
Das ist natürlich gefaked, klar, aber es ist, trotzdem gehe ich nicht mit dem Hintergrund hierhin, ein perfektes Foto zu machen, dass ich besonders stylisch aussehe oder besonders hübsch. Natürlich habe ich mich heute hübsch gemacht, aber es soll eher auch da wieder einfach lustig sein.
Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Tumblr. Also check out our boards and Pinterest and pictures on Instagram. I'm Sam Cepeda. Thanks for joining us.
And that's the news for tonight. Join us online and here again tomorrow evening. From all of us here at Eagle News, I'm Alma Angeles and
we're one with 25.